water clung to her skin, silk blouse heavy, marble floor slick beneath her heels. Across from her, a manager's hand gripped an empty bottle-proof and weapon both. Around them, phones floated, capturing a humiliation no one dared stop. Above, an elevator hummed toward the lobby. In 60 seconds, someone would step out and turn this quiet cruelty into a reckoning the whole building would remember. The silence in the lobby was sharp enough to cut. Sunlight spilled in through towering glass panels, painting the marble floor in gold, yet every gaze was locked on the soaked woman in the center. Her blouse clung to her frame, droplets running down her cheek like a slow betrayal. She didn't move, didn't speak, she simply stood, eyes steady, as if daring the world to blink before she did. Across from her, a tall woman in a slate-gray suit gripped an empty bottle, her fingers wrapped around it like it was still a weapon. A faint smirk tugged at the corner of her mouth, the smirk of someone convinced she'd already won. Around them, employees hovered like shadows, their phones raised, recording each frozen heartbeat. From the far side of the room, the elevator chimed a delicate, metallic sound that somehow felt like a warning. Heads turned, whispers rippling through the crowd. The soaked woman's hand twitched toward her bag, her thumb brushing the worn leather strap. A small motion, but it carried the weight of choice, stay silent, or call the one person who could change everything in an instant. The suited woman took a slow step forward, her heels echoing in the cavernous space. "You've already overstayed," she said, voice low but sharp enough to carry. "Leave now, or I'll make sure you regret staying." The wet woman's gaze didn't waver. Her lips parted, but no words came not yet. Somewhere, deep inside, a fuse had been lit. And when it burned through, the detonation would shatter more than just the quiet of that lobby. The woman in the suit tilted her head, her smirk widening as if she were savoring the moment. Behind her, whispers tangled with the faint hum of the air vents, every voice blending into a nervous murmur. The crowd's eyes shifted between the two women like spectators, before a storm sensing lightning, waiting for thunder. The drenched woman's fingers curled tighter around the strap of her bag. She could feel the chilled fabric clinging to her ribs, the sting of cold water creeping down her spine. Her wedding ring, a delicate band of rose gold and onyx, caught a stray beam of sunlight, a quiet glint in a room that suddenly felt suffocating. "You think you can just walk in here?" The suited woman's voice rose, pulling more onlookers toward the lobby. "Waltz into a place you clearly don't belong." Each word landed with calculated venom, the kind designed to sting not just the ears, but the dignity of the one receiving them. From the back of the crowd, a young man in a maintenance uniform hesitated, his brow furrowed as if recognizing the woman at the center. But he stayed silent, his jaw tightening against words that might cost him his job. The bottle's last drop slid off its rim, hitting the marble with a tiny, echoing tap. The sound seemed to crack something in the air, like the breaking point of restraint. The soaked woman straightened her shoulders, her eyes locking onto her accusers with an unspoken warning. "I could end this with one phone call," she said softly, her voice calm yet carrying through the room like the first note of an anthem. And in that moment, those who truly knew the weight of her words felt the temperature shift, because they realized she wasn't bluffing. The woman in the gray suit laughed, not the kind born from humor, but the brittle, cutting kind that left splinters in the air. "A phone call?" she said, her voice dripping with mockery. "To who? Your imaginary friend?" The smirk was practiced, the tone designed to draw more eyes, to make this moment hers. But the soaked woman didn't flinch. Her gaze held steady, calm in a way that unnerved those watching. The edges of her lips almost curved upward, not in amusement, but in the quiet knowledge that the balance of power was about to shift. Around them, the crowd thickened. Staff from upper floors pressed against the glass railing above, looking down as if watching a scene from some unfolding drama. The phones stayed up, lenses capturing every flicker of expression. A middle-aged man in a security uniform stepped forward from the fringe, hesitation in his stride. His eyes darted between the woman holding the empty bottle and the one standing drenched, defiant. There was recognition in his gaze, faint, like a memory tugging at the edge of certainty, but with it came caution. He knew the cost of stepping into a fight that wasn't officially his. I said, "Leave." The suited woman pressed, her tone sharper now, as though volume could cement authority. She gestured toward the revolving doors with an almost theatrical flick of her wrist. "Before I have you escorted out." The drenched woman tilted her head, letting the silence breathe for a heartbeat too long. Then she spoke soft enough to force everyone to lean in, yet clear enough to carry. "You might want to be very careful about who you're trying to throw out of this building." And just like that, the room's air changed a current of unease, rippling through those who'd thought they understood the scene. Something was coming, something they weren't ready for. The suited woman's smirk faltered for the briefest moment, a hairline crack in her performance, but she masked it with another sharp laugh. "And who exactly do you think you are?" she demanded. Her voice louder now, projecting to the growing audience like she was playing to an invisible balcony. The drenched woman's hand slipped into her bag, fingers brushing over a phone slick with condensation from her wet sleeve. She could feel her pulse in her fingertips, not from fear, but from the slow, controlled burn of anger. Her thumb hovered over the screen, and for a second the lobby seemed to hold its breath. A young intern in a navy blazer, no older than 20, leaned toward his coworker and whispered, "I've seen her before. I'm sure of it." His friend hushed him quickly, eyes flicking toward the suited woman as if her ears could stretch across the room. The security officer shifted his weight, his hand twitching near the radio at his belt. He looked as though he wanted to speak, but the invisible leash of hierarchy kept him rooted. Instead, his gaze darted toward the glass doors and then to the elevator at the far end of the lobby. Its digital panel glowed, showing a slow descent from the top floor. The drenched woman glanced toward it too, just once, before locking eyes with her accuser again. "You're about to find out," she said quietly, every syllable steady, deliberate. The suited woman's lips curled into something between a sneer and a smile, but whatever satisfaction she felt was about to be drowned out by the sound that followed. The elevator bell chimed, and the doors began to slide open. The polished steel doors parted, releasing a thin breath of chilled air from the upper floors. Conversations died mid-sentence. Every phone remained steady, every eye fixed on the figure stepping into view. A man emerged tall, precise in movement, his charcoal suit cut to perfection. His gaze swept the lobby once, taking in the faces, the tension, the damp glint of water still dripping from marble to shoe leather. He didn't speak at first, but the weight in his eyes was enough to silence even the boldest whisper. And then he saw her. In 3 strides he crossed the space, the measured pace of an executive dissolving into something urgent, almost frantic. His hand found her face, thumbs brushing away the streaks of water and smeared makeup. The touch was gentle, intimate, the kind that didn't need words to explain its history. "What happened?" His voice was low, dangerous in its restraint. The suited woman froze, the bottle in her grip suddenly heavy, as though it had turned to stone. A bead of sweat slid down her temple, her practiced authority buckling under the weight of the man's attention. The crowd, sensing the shift, began to edge backward, creating an empty ring around them. The elevator's closing chime echoed behind, but no one turned. Every soul in that lobby knew the real movement was about to start. And as the man's eyes locked on the woman holding the bottle, the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The man's stare fixed on the suited woman, unblinking, steady as stone. His voice, when it came, was softer than anyone expected and far more dangerous. "Who?" he asked. "Put that water on her?" No one moved. The suited woman opened her mouth, but only air escaped at first. When she finally spoke, it was a stammer, a weak attempt to patch together authority from the scraps left in the room. She was trespassing, making demands. Demands. His tone sliced through her excuse, and his eyes didn't waver. She came here to see me. The words landed with the force of a gavel, and a collective ripple of realization moved through the crowd. A few people actually took a step back, as though they'd been too close to a blast zone. He shifted, placing himself fully between his wife and her accuser, his hand still resting protectively at the small of her back. "You thought you could humiliate her and get away with it?" he asked. Still calm, but with a precision that cut deeper than shouting ever could. The suited woman's grip on the bottle faltered, her knuckles pale, her smirk gone. The silence in the lobby wasn't just heavy now, it was suffocating, pressing in from every wall. And then, with a slow inhale, the man turned, sweeping his gaze across every single face in the circle around them. "If you saw what happened and said nothing," he began, his voice carrying to the farthest corners, "you're already part of the story I'm about to tell." No one dared breathe too loudly. The weight of his words clung to the glass walls, bouncing back into the faces of those holding their phones like shields. Some lowered them slightly, guilt flickering behind their eyes. Others kept recording, maybe to protect themselves, maybe because they knew they were witnessing something that would ripple far beyond this lobby. The suited woman finally spoke, but her voice lacked the edge it had minutes ago. She didn't identify herself properly. She said, her tone brittle, defensive. Anyone. His brow lifted, his calm now laced with something sharper. Anyone could walk in here, wearing my name on their hand, holding an appointment booked under my clearance, and be treated like this? Her mouth opened again, but the words snagged on the truth she couldn't escape. Somewhere behind the crowd, a printer hummed to life, a mundane sound that somehow made the silence in the center feel even louder. The man's eyes drifted back to his wife, his thumb brushing a last bead of water from her cheek. "You came here for me," he said, almost to himself, but loud enough for all to hear. "And this is what they gave you." He turned again, scanning every face, letting the pause stretch long enough to make them shift uncomfortably. "Every single person here just learned something," he said finally, "about how this place works and about what happens next." The suited woman's breath caught, because from the look in his eyes, she knew what happens next wasn't going to stay confined to these walls. He stepped closer to the suited woman, closing the space until the faint scent of her perfume mixed with the metallic chill of the elevator air. His voice, still measured, now carried a weight that left no escape. "You insulted me. My name, my home, everything this place was supposed to stand for." Her lips trembled, the practiced armor of confidence slipping in front of dozens of silent witnesses. From the second-floor balcony, a pair of analysts leaned over the railing, their whispers sharp and urgent. They weren't talking about the water anymore. They were talking about the man's reputation, about how this moment would echo into boardrooms and headlines. The drenched woman hadn't moved, but her presence seemed to grow with every second. It was in the way she stood, not defiant, but anchored, as if nothing could shove her from the ground she had chosen to hold. The way her eyes didn't drop even once. "You treated her like a trespasser," he continued, his words deliberate, each one placed like a stone in the foundation of a verdict. "And you did it in front of an audience." He glanced toward the raised phones, the red recording dots glowing like tiny, unblinking eyes. "Which means this isn't just between us anymore. This is already everywhere." Her shoulders stiffened, a flicker of panic finally surfacing in her eyes. But before she could speak, the man turned back to his wife, and the smallest smile, not of joy, but of certainty, passed between them. Because both of them knew. The real reckoning was only just beginning. A murmur swept through the crowd, soft, uncertain, but undeniable. It wasn't the sound of gossip now. It was the quiet shuffle of people realizing they had been standing in the wrong place, on the wrong side. A few lowered their phones, but most kept filming, sensing that what was about to happen would be talked about far beyond these walls. The suited woman tried again, her voice thinner than before. I was following protocol. He tilted his head slightly, studying her as if she'd just said something absurd. Protocol, he repeated slowly, letting the word hang in the air like a shard of glass. Tell me which part of your precious protocol allows you to degrade someone without listening, without looking, without even thinking? She swallowed hard, but said nothing. Behind her, a young assistant in a cream blouse stepped back, putting distance between herself and the accused as though the association might be toxic. A man in a tailored vest, clearly from the upper floor, slipped quietly toward the exit, phone pressed to his ear, perhaps already calling someone to report what was unfolding. The drenched woman remained still, but her silence was not weakness. It was calculated, giving every word from her husband's mouth more space to land. Her eyes were locked on the suited woman, unblinking, as if memorizing the face of someone who had just written their own downfall. Then, without looking away, he spoke again, his voice dropping low, yet carrying across the entire lobby. Do you have any idea who she is? The question didn't sound like an inquiry. It sounded like the moment before the hammer strikes steel. The suited woman's mouth opened, but the words caught halfway, collapsing into a shallow breath. Her eyes darted to the faces around her, searching for support, finding only avoidance. Even those who had stood closest to her earlier now looked away, the invisible wall of loyalty dissolving under the weight of truth they could no longer deny. The suited woman began, but her voice wavered. She walked in here without clearance. The man's brow lifted, a slow, deliberate gesture that made her stop. Clearance? He said, almost amused. Her name is engraved on my clearance. Her presence here doesn't need permission. It never did. A ripple moved through the crowd, a shift from curiosity to recognition. Quiet murmurs turned into sharper whispers, and the atmosphere grew charged. The drenched woman, still silent, lowered her gaze for a fraction of a second, not out of submission, but in that deep, controlled breath one takes before impact. Her hand rested on her bag, her fingers brushing the cool edge of a phone she hadn't yet used, as if she was waiting for the perfect moment to let it speak for her. The man stepped even closer to the suited woman, his shadow falling over her, his voice lowering until the entire lobby had to strain to catch every word. You didn't just make a mistake today, he said. You made it in the worst possible place, at the worst possible time. The suited woman's throat bobbed as she swallowed. She didn't yet understand the full scale of what he meant, but the crowd did. And the air around them was heavy with the knowledge that the moment of reckoning was seconds away. The pause before his next words stretched so long that the hum of the building's ventilation became deafening. Every eye was on him, some wide with dread, others gleaming with anticipation. The suited woman's breathing had gone shallow, and her fingers twitched against the bottle as if holding on to it might anchor her. This, he said at last, his voice low and precise, is my wife. The impact of those 4 words was instant. It rippled through the crowd like a shockwave, toppling every false assumption that had been propped up over the last few minutes. A handful of people actually gasped. Others froze, their phones trembling in their hands as the reality of what they had just filmed settled in. He didn't stop there. She came here today for something simple, something good, and you turned it into a spectacle. You degraded her, in my building, under my name, in front of my people. His gaze swept the circle, making sure every witness understood that my people included them, and that their silence had been noticed. The drenched woman's eyes glistened, not from the water still clinging to her lashes, but from the intensity of the moment. She had said nothing for so long, letting the weight of his voice carry the truth for her, and now, for the first time, She stepped forward. "I was here for him," she said, her tone steady, unwavering. "And you told me I didn't belong." Her words, simple but sharp, landed like a blade's edge. The suited woman flinched and the crowd shifted, their collective stance beginning to tilt. The man straightened, his voice now cutting through the room with the authority of someone who knew there was no turning back. "Every second of this has been recorded," he said, glancing at the cameras. "And every second is about to be seen by more people than you can imagine. And for the first time—" The suited woman's face showed it the fear of someone realizing that their moment of control had just become their undoing. The suited woman's lips parted as if to speak, but nothing came. Her voice seemed to have abandoned her entirely. All around, the audience tightened into an invisible wall, the weight of collective judgment closing in. Some tried to avoid eye contact, others leaned forward, drawn by the gravity of the moment, knowing they were witnesses to a fall no one could rewind. The man took a single step closer, the kind of step that feels like a verdict. "I built this place on trust," he said, his tone a low, steady current. "Trust in the people who represent it. Trust in the ones who lead." His eyes pinned her in place. "And you've proven you can't be trusted with either." The drenched woman finally moved to stand fully at his side, her presence anchoring him as much as his anchored her. She didn't need to speak. Her silence had been her power all along, a mirror reflecting the cruelty she'd endured. "This isn't about one insult," he continued, scanning the crowd. "It's about what it reveals, how easy it is for bias to dress itself as procedure. How comfortable some of you have become ignoring it, until it happens to someone you can't ignore." The suited woman's eyes darted toward the exit, but the path was blocked by the very people who had once stood behind her. The air seemed to press tighter with each breath, as if the building itself had turned against her. And then his voice dropped into a tone that made the hair on the back of every neck rise. "By the time you leave this lobby, you won't just be leaving the building." And somewhere in the crowd, someone whispered, "It's over." The bottle slipped from her hand, hitting the marble with a hollow clatter that echoed far too loud for such a small object. The sound seemed to seal her fate, like the last line of a story she'd lost control of. The words sharp but not shouted, because the truth didn't need volume to be heard. Your position, your access, your authority, all of it ends now. The suited woman's knees seemed to weaken, her gaze darting toward the crowd, searching for even one sympathetic face. None came. The same people who had once stood in her shadow now held their phones higher, capturing her collapse from every angle. Two security staff stepped forward, not rushing, but moving with the slow certainty of inevitability. She tried to speak some plea, some justification, but the words tangled in her throat. Her expression shifted from defiance to disbelief, to the cold realization that she was no longer in control of anything. The man didn't watch her leave. His attention stayed on his wife, his hand resting lightly against the small of her back. "This ends here," he said to her, but the words were meant for the room, for the building, for anyone who thought they could act like this and still hide behind procedure. The suited woman was led past the revolving doors, out into the open air. The crowd parted silently, and for the first time there was no whisper, no rustle, only the faint hum of traffic outside. As the glass doors swung closed behind her, the man finally looked up, meeting the eyes of every witness. "Remember this," he said, his voice low but steady. "Silence is a choice, and so is courage." The drenched woman stood taller, the sunlight catching the curve of her ring as she laced her fingers with his. And somewhere deep in the quiet that followed, the shift was unmistakable, the kind of change that doesn't stop at one moment, one lobby, or one building, but keeps moving until the whole world has to notice.